The Deathworld Council had seen it all, or at least, they believed they had. For centuries, their consortium of 12 advanced species had cataloged the most dangerous planetary systems across the known galaxy. They had studied predator-prey relationships that defied conventional evolution. They had documented atmospheric compositions that would dissolve standard environmental suits in seconds. They had even managed to collect and contain biological samples from the crushing depths of methane oceans and the scorching surfaces of planets that orbited too close to their suns. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared them for what emerged from the seemingly innocuous sample delivered by the Earth Embassy. The central laboratory of the research vessel Axiom hummed with a quiet intensity. Suspended in the void between star systems, the massive ship housed the Council's most advanced equipment and brightest minds. Its design reflected the diverse biological needs of its 12 constituent species, temperature-controlled environments that shifted from near freezing to volcanic heat, atmospheric chambers that ranged from methane-rich to oxygen-saturated, and gravity simulators that could reproduce conditions from microgravity to crushing pressure. At the heart of it all stood Dr. Avara Lynn, her six-fingered hands moving with practiced precision over the molecular scanner. As the vessel's leading molecular biologist, she had earned her position through decades of groundbreaking research on cellular resilience. Her species, the Volari, were known for their analytical minds and methodical approach to problem-solving, traits that had served Avara well throughout her career. "Initial cellular mapping complete," she announced, her voice carrying the slight musical lilt characteristic of Volari speech. Her large, amber eyes remained fixed on the holographic display floating before her. "Beginning deep tissue analysis of human sample designation, Earth 7. Around her, various council members observed from their specialized environmental chambers. Some watched through thick glass barriers, while others relied on sensor feeds transmitted directly to neural interfaces. Despite their physiological differences, all shared the same expression of wary curiosity. "Proceed with caution, Dr. Lynn," came the gravelly voice of Senior Counselor Thax. The ancient draconid shifted his massive, scaled body, causing the reinforced platform beneath him to creak slightly. "Remember our classification protocols." Avara acknowledged with a slight bow of her head. "Of course, Senior Counselor. This is a preliminary examination only. The sample remains in triple isolation as per Deathworld containment procedures." She returned her attention to the scanner, where the human tissue sample, barely larger than her smallest fingertip, floated in nutrient suspension. To the naked eye, it appeared unremarkable. A small, pinkish mass of cells harvested from a human volunteer at the Earth Embassy. But as the molecular scanner penetrated deeper, Avara's expression changed. Her elongated fingers froze over the controls, and her pupils dilated sharply. "This can't be right," she whispered, more to herself than to the council members. She adjusted the scanner's parameters and ran the analysis again. The results were identical. "Dr. Lynn," Counselor Atari, a bioluminescent Lyresian, pulsed with concern. "What have you found?" Avara looked up, her professional composure momentarily shattered. "The cellular regeneration rate. It's unprecedented." With a fluid gesture, she expanded the holographic display so all council members could see. The human cells were dividing and regenerating at a rate that defied the council's established biological classifications. "According to our standards, a species from a Class 3 environment, which Earth has been categorized as, should show cellular resilience within these parameters." She indicated a narrow band on a comparative chart. "But this sample exceeds those parameters by a factor of 17. A murmur rippled through the council chambers. 17 times the expected regeneration rate was not just an anomaly. It was a paradigm shift. "Could this be contamination?" suggested Counselor Noor. Her voice filtered through the dense aqueous environment she required to survive. Perhaps an interaction with our nutrient medium? I considered that, Avara replied, her professional demeanor returning as she focused on the problem. I've already run 3 comparative analyses using different suspension media. The results are consistent. Furthermore, the sample shows remarkable tolerance to environmental stress. With another gesture, she brought up a second display showing the results of various stress tests. The cells maintain integrity under radiation levels that would destroy most Class 3 cellular structures. They show adaptation to pH variations that would trigger immediate cellular collapse in comparable species. Senior Counselor Thax's reptilian features hardened. This suggests a misclassification. Earth should perhaps be categorized as a Class 4 or even V Deathworld. That's not all, Avara continued, her voice growing more intense. The genetic structure itself contains anomalies I've never encountered before. There appear to be sections of code that remain dormant under normal conditions, but activate under specific stressors, like a genetic contingency plan. The laboratory fell silent as the implications sank in. The Council had encountered adaptive genetics before, but usually in the form of gradual evolutionary responses over generations. Immediate cellular adaptation was exceedingly rare. I recommend advancing to controlled growth experiments, Avara said into the silence. Under maximum isolation protocols. Of course. The council chamber erupted in conflicting opinions. Some members, like the research-focused Lyresians, supported the proposal immediately. Others, particularly those from species with historical reasons to fear biological threats, voiced strong opposition. Absolutely not. The voice belonged to Counselor Vex, a silicon-based life form whose crystalline body structure refracted the laboratory's lights. We've all read the historical accounts from the human homeworld. Their biological warfare capabilities, even at their technological infancy, were terrifying. And now we're considering cultivating their tissue? With respect, Counselor, Avara countered. That's precisely why this research is valuable. Understanding these adaptive capabilities could revolutionize our medical technologies. The potential benefits outweigh the risks, Vex interrupted. That's the same argument that has preceded every major catastrophe in Council history. Senior Counselor Thax raised a clawed hand, silencing the debate. This is why we have protocols, he rumbled. Dr. Lin, you may proceed with controlled growth experiments under maximum isolation, triple-sealed laboratory, atmospheric barriers, and continuous monitoring. At the first sign of any anomaly beyond your initial findings, the experiment will be terminated. Avara bowed deeply. Thank you, Senior Counselor. I will begin preparations immediately. As the council members dispersed, Environmental Engineer Gran approached Avara's workstation. The Floran's furred face was set in lines of concern, his whiskers twitching nervously. You've opened quite the Pandora's box, he murmured, using a human idiom he'd picked up from his work with the Earth Embassy. Avara's amber eyes flicked to him. You've been studying human culture too closely, Gran. Perhaps not closely enough, he replied. Their mythology is filled with warnings about curiosity and forbidden knowledge. Maybe there's wisdom there we should heed. Avara's fingers danced over the controls, securing the sample for transport to the high-security laboratory. Science doesn't advance through fear, Gran. It advances through bold inquiry. And sometimes retreats through painful lessons, he countered. Be careful, Avara. There's something about these humans that doesn't fit our understanding. The Earth Ambassador, Rana Vu, she mentioned something once about their planet's history, about how their species survived multiple extinction-level events that should have wiped them out. Avara paused, considering his words. All the more reason to understand their biology, she said finally. Knowledge is never the enemy, Gran, only how we choose to use it. As she secured the sample and prepared to leave, a communication alert chimed softly. It was from Earth Ambassador Rendezvous, almost as if the diplomat had sensed her name being discussed. Dr. Lin, the ambassador's holographic image greeted her. I've received notification that you've begun analyzing our tissue sample. The Earth Embassy is eager to hear your preliminary findings. Avara hesitated. Protocol dictated that research results be reported to the Council before any external entities. But Ambassador Vu had been instrumental in facilitating this research opportunity. We've only just begun the analysis, Ambassador, she replied diplomatically. But I can confirm that the sample shows intriguing properties that might justify reclassifying Earth in our planetary threat assessment. Rendezvous' expression remained pleasantly neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Is that so? Well, we've always maintained that humanity's resilience is our greatest asset. I look forward to your complete findings. Doctor, Earth stands ready to provide any additional samples or data you might require. After the communication ended, Gran gave Avara a pointed look. Did you notice? Notice what? She wasn't surprised, not even slightly. Avara considered this as she finalized the containment procedures for the sample. Perhaps the humans know more about their own biology than they've shared with us. Or perhaps, Gran suggested quietly, they wanted us to discover it for ourselves. The thought followed Avara as she transported the sample to the maximum security laboratory, a completely isolated section of the research vessel. The implications were both fascinating and unsettling. Was this a scientific gesture of goodwill from Earth, or a calculated demonstration of capabilities? Either way, she was about to find out just how remarkable human biology truly was. The maximum security laboratory was a marvel of containment engineering, separated from the main research vessel by 3 airlocks and a vacuum barrier. It operated on an independent life support system. In the event of catastrophic contamination, the entire module could be jettisoned into space and remotely destroyed. Avara hoped it wouldn't come to that. Over the next 14 cycles, she immersed herself in the study of the human tissue sample. What began as a controlled growth experiment quickly evolved into something far more complex. The cells didn't just regenerate, they thrived. Under carefully monitored conditions, they formed structures that self-organized with an efficiency that bordered on intelligence. Cellular cohesion has increased by another 23%, she dictated into the research log. The sample now displays multi-layer differentiation without any external growth factors. I've never seen anything like it. Through the observation window, members of the Council watched with growing fascination and concern. The original sample, barely visible to the naked eye, had grown into a complex matrix the size of Avara's palm. It's developing its own vascularization, Councillor Atari noted, his bioluminescence pulsing with excitement. Self-contained circulatory pathways. And defense mechanisms, added Councillor Vex ominously. Those outer cellular layers have hardened in response to our probing. It's adapting to perceived threats. Avara couldn't deny the observation. The growing tissue mass had indeed developed a tougher exterior after their attempts to extract samples for analysis. It was as if the cells remembered the intrusion and had prepared for future attempts. I propose we introduce controlled stressors, she suggested. Radiation, temperature variation, chemical irritants, all within safe parameters. If we can map the full range of adaptive responses, we might begin to understand the genetic switches controlling them. The Council deliberated briefly before approving the next phase of experiments. Over the following cycles, Avara subjected the growing tissue to a carefully calibrated series of stressors, documenting each response with meticulous precision. The results were nothing short of astonishing. The sample doesn't just adapt, she explained during a full Council briefing. It innovates. When exposed to radiation, it didn't just develop radiation-resistant properties. It actually began metabolizing the radiation as an energy source. When we introduced toxic compounds, it synthesized novel enzymes to neutralize them. It's as if the genetic code contains solutions to problems the organism hasn't even encountered yet. This goes beyond adaptation. Senior Counselor Thax rumbled. This suggests preparation. Exactly, Avara agreed, unable to hide her excitement despite the growing tension in the chamber. It's as if humans evolved not just to survive their current environment, but to be ready for any possible future threat. The implications for medical science are enormous. Imagine treatments that could adapt to individual patients, or vaccines that could evolve alongside pathogens, or biological weapons that could overcome any defense. Counselor Vex interjected darkly. Have you considered that possibility, Dr. Lin? That perhaps this remarkable adaptability evolved because humans themselves are predators? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and unavoidable. Earth's historical records, shared as part of diplomatic exchanges, contained enough evidence of humanity's capacity for violence to give weight to Vex's concern. All species have the potential for both creation and destruction. Avara replied carefully. Our responsibility as scientists is to pursue knowledge with appropriate safeguards. And are your safeguards truly adequate? Vex pressed. Because your tissue sample has grown into something that bears little resemblance to any controlled experiment I've witnessed before. Avara couldn't entirely dismiss the criticism. The growing mass of human tissue had indeed exceeded her initial projections. It now occupied a specialized containment chamber, its complex structures visible even without magnification. What had begun as simple cellular division had evolved into what she had taken to calling super tissue, an organized, responsive biological entity that continued to develop new capabilities. All containment protocols remain intact, she assured the Council. The sample remains fully isolated, with multiple redundant safety systems. But even as she spoke, an alert chimed softly from her monitoring device. Excusing herself from the Council chamber, she quickly reviewed the notification. Anomalous enzyme activity detected, the system reported. Unknown compound being synthesized within the sample. Avara felt a flutter of both excitement and apprehension. This was new. The sample had begun producing a substance that wasn't in response to any of their introduced stressors. It was an independent development, suggesting yet another level of autonomous function. She should report this to the Council immediately. Protocol demanded it. But the scientist in her, the part that had dedicated her life to understanding the boundaries of biological possibility, made a different choice. Continue monitoring, she instructed the system. Alert me if synthesis exceeds current containment parameters. She returned to the Council chamber, where the debate about the ethics of the experiment continued. She said nothing about the new development, telling herself that she needed more data before raising potentially unnecessary concerns. It was a decision she would soon regret. When the alarm sounded 3 cycles later, Avara was in her private quarters, reviewing research data. The blaring tone signified a critical containment breach, the most serious emergency classification in the research vessel's protocols. She was running before the automated announcement finished. All personnel, Emergency Protocol Sigma 9 is now in effect. Proceed immediately to designated evacuation points. This is not a drill. The corridors were filled with crew members rushing toward evacuation shuttles. But Avara moved against the flow, heading for the maximum security laboratory. She had to see for herself what had happened. Environmental engineer Gran intercepted her halfway, his fur standing on end with stress. Avara, are you insane? We need to evacuate. What happened? She demanded, still trying to push past him. Your experiment happened. His voice was strained with fear and accusation. The sample breached containment. It's spreading throughout the laboratory module. That's impossible, Avara insisted. The containment field was designed to withstand... It didn't break through the containment, Gran interrupted. It changed it. The field integrity is intact, but something about its molecular structure has been altered. The sample is somehow passing through it, as if it's not even there. Cold dread washed over Avara. "I need to see it." The council has ordered complete evacuation. They're preparing to jettison the entire laboratory module. They can't, not without understanding what's happening. This could be the most significant biological discovery in council history. Gran seized her by the shoulders, his claws digging slightly into her skin. Listen to yourself. Your scientific curiosity is blinding you to the danger. Whatever that human tissue has become, it's not behaving like any sample. It's behaving like an organism with purpose. The thought stopped Avara cold. She had been so focused on the cellular mechanics, the genetic adaptations, that she hadn't fully considered the implications of what they were creating. Not growing a sample, but potentially nurturing a new form of life. "I have to report to the council," she said, changing direction abruptly. The emergency council chamber was a scene of barely controlled chaos. Representatives from all 12 species were present, some in person and others via secure holographic projection. Senior Counselor Thax dominated the center of the room, issuing orders in his commanding rumble. Full evacuation of sections 12 through 17. Prepare the laboratory module for emergency jettison. Authorization code? Counselor, Avara interrupted, pushing her way into the chamber. Please, you must reconsider. We need to understand what's happening before we destroy everything. Thax turned his massive head toward her. Reptilian eyes narrowed with fury. Dr. Lin, your experiment has compromised the safety of this entire vessel and everyone aboard. The time for research is over. But the implications are precisely why we must act decisively, he cut her off. Our sensors indicate that the human tissue sample has grown exponentially, consuming the nutrient medium and now organic components of the laboratory itself. It's developing structures that our systems can't even classify. A holographic display in the center of the chamber showed real-time footage from within the laboratory module. Avara stared in disbelief at what she saw. The once small tissue sample had expanded to fill much of the main containment area. But more than its size. It was its organization that sent chills through her. The mass pulsed with life, rhythmic movements suggesting circulatory and perhaps even neural activity. Extensions reached out like pseudopods, exploring the laboratory equipment, sometimes enveloping smaller items entirely. It's intelligent, whispered Counselor Atari. His bioluminescence dimmed with awe and fear. Not intelligence, Avara corrected automatically, her scientific mind still analyzing despite her shock. It's demonstrating tropism, movement in response to stimuli. Plants do this. Single-celled organisms do this. It's not the same as consciousness. Then explain that, Counselor Vex demanded, pointing to a new development on the display. The mass had begun forming distinct structures that bore an unsettling resemblance to sensory organs. Primitive eyes, detection surfaces that might serve as rudimentary ears or olfactory receptors. And throughout the growing entity, the strange enzyme that Avara had detected earlier was being produced in increasing quantities. The enzyme, she murmured, moving closer to the display. It's the key to all of this. If I could just analyze its structure... Enough, Thax roared. The jettison sequence has been initiated. In 10 minutes, the laboratory module will be separated from this vessel and destroyed. This discussion is over. Avara turned to the council, desperation in her voice. Please, 9 minutes. Give me access to the remote sensing equipment. Let me at least record what's happening for future research. We may never have an opportunity like this again. Perhaps it was the plea in her voice, or perhaps the scientific curiosity that had led each of them to the council in the first place. But after a moment of tense silence, Thax nodded curtly. 9 minutes, remote access only, and then you will proceed to your evacuation point without further argument. Avara didn't waste a second. At a nearby terminal, she connected to the laboratory's advanced sensors, directing them to focus on the enzyme being produced by the evolving mass. The molecular structure appeared on her screen, and she gasped. "This isn't possible," she whispered. The enzyme was unlike anything in the Council's vast biological database. It wasn't just complex, it was elegant. A masterpiece of molecular engineering that made even the most advanced biochemical research seem primitive by comparison. And it was producing energy. Not chemical energy. Not the ATP that powered most biological processes. But something far more exotic. The sensors registered emissions that resembled quantum fluctuations. Tiny reality ripples that defied standard physical laws. As she watched, transfixed, the energy emissions intensified. The mass at the center of the laboratory pulsed more rapidly, its newly formed sensory structures orienting toward the cameras as if it knew it was being observed. 7 minutes to jettison, announced the ship's automated system. Avara barely heard it. She was wholly focused on the miracle and horror unfolding before her. The human tissue had transcended its origins completely. It was no longer a sample, no longer even recognizable as human. It had become something new, something that existed at the boundary of biology and physics. And the enzyme was the catalyst for it all. "Dr. Lin," Gron's voice came from behind her, urgent and strained. "We need to go. Now." "Not yet," she murmured, fingers flying over the controls as she tried to capture every bit of data possible. "The enzyme is reaching some kind of critical concentration. Something's about to happen." On the display, the mass had drawn itself into a tighter configuration, sensory structures now completely oriented toward the observation cameras. The energy readings were spiking, quantum fluctuations growing stronger and more coherent. 5 minutes to jettison. In the emergency council chamber, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation and dread. All eyes were fixed on the holographic display showing the transformed human tissue. Even those who had argued most strongly for immediate destruction couldn't look away from the biological marvel they had inadvertently helped create. "The energy signature is becoming more organized," Avara reported, her voice tight with concentration. "It's as if the enzyme is creating some kind of quantum field." "To what purpose?" Thax demanded. Before Avara could speculate, alarms blared throughout the system. "Warning. Energy surge detected in laboratory module. Containment fields at maximum capacity." The mass in the laboratory pulsed once, twice, and then seemed to glow from within. The energy readings spiked beyond the sensor's ability to measure. "It's going to breach!" someone shouted. "Accelerate jettison sequence," Thax ordered. But it was too late. On the display, the glowing mass suddenly expanded, not physically, but energetically. A wave of quantum distortion erupted from it, passing through the containment fields as if they weren't there. The wave expanded outward, passing through the laboratory walls and beyond. "It's coming here," Avara realized with sudden clarity. "Everyone out, now!" The council chamber erupted into chaos as members fled toward the exits. But the quantum wave moved faster than any of them could run. It washed over the chamber, over the entire research vessel, in seconds. And then the screaming began. It wasn't pain that triggered it. It was revelation. As the quantum wave passed through organic matter, it carried with it the complete genetic memory of the human tissue sample. Every council member, every crew member caught in its path, experienced a direct neural impression of human biological potential. They saw the unbroken chain of evolution that had created humanity, from single-celled organisms to complex consciousness. They felt the countless near-extinction events that had pruned and shaped human genetics, creating unprecedented resilience. They witnessed the molecular machinery that allowed humans to adapt to environments from Arctic ice to equatorial heat, from mountain peaks to ocean depths. But most of all, they experienced the one quality that made humans unique among all the species the Council had ever encountered: biological immortality. Not literal eternal life, but the theoretical potential for it. Human cells, properly maintained and protected from environmental damage, could divide and regenerate indefinitely. The famous Hayflick limit, the number of times a cell could divide before dying, was not a fundamental biological law for humans. It was merely a temporary evolutionary compromise, a safeguard against cancer that came at the cost of aging and death. The human tissue sample, freed from those evolutionary constraints and provided with ideal conditions, had begun to express the species' ultimate potential. It had activated genetic sequences that were dormant in normal human biology. It had created the enzyme that now showed every advanced species on the vessel exactly what they were witnessing: the first steps toward post-evolutionary existence. In the emergency council chamber, Senior Counselor Thax was the first to find his voice through the shock. His massive frame trembled as he stared at the holographic display, where the glowing mass in the laboratory had begun to dissipate, its energy expended in the quantum transmission. "All this time," he rumbled, "we classified them as dangerous because of their technology, their aggression, their ability to survive on a hostile planet. But that wasn't it at all. They're dangerous because they're becoming immortal," Counselor Atari whispered, his bioluminescence flickering with emotional overload. "Because they have the potential to transcend biology itself." Throughout the vessel, the quantum waves' effects were fading. The direct neural impression was receding, leaving behind a residue of awe and terror. The screams had subsided, replaced by a stunned silence, broken only by the occasional sob or moan. 3 minutes to jettison," the automated system announced, continuing its program sequence despite the unprecedented events. Avara's mind was racing, trying to process what she had experienced: the genetic memory, the revealed potential, the implications for every species in the Council and beyond. It was too much to absorb at once. But one thing was clear: they had grossly underestimated humanity. "We need to abort the jettison," she said suddenly, turning to Thax. "The sample is spent. It's breaking down now that it's completed. Whatever it was trying to do." On the display, she was right. The once imposing mass was losing cohesion, its complex structures dissolving back into their component cells. The energy readings were dropping rapidly. "Complete the jettison," Thax ordered, his voice leaving no room for debate. "And then sterilize the entire path of the quantum wave, every surface, every system." "But the research is over." Thax's reptilian eyes fixed on Avara with cold finality. "What we've witnessed here goes beyond scientific inquiry. It is an existential revelation that the Council is not prepared to confront." The laboratory module separated from the research vessel with a series of muffled thumps. Through the viewport, Avara watched as it drifted away, still containing what remained of the remarkable experiment. A moment later, energy beams from the vessel's defense systems struck the module, reducing it to superheated plasma. All evidence destroyed, all traces erased, or so the Council believed. In her quarters, while the rest of the crew were undergoing precautionary decontamination, Avara sat before her personal terminal. Her fingers moved swiftly over the controls, encrypting and compressing the data she had managed to extract in those final minutes. The molecular structure of the enzyme, the energy patterns of the quantum wave, the genetic sequences that had activated to create it all. Not everything had been lost. When the file was complete, she hesitated only briefly before activating a secure communication channel to Earth Embassy. Ambassador Rana Vu would know what to do with this information. Perhaps humanity was already aware of its potential. Perhaps this had been a test all along, to see how the Council would react to the revelation. Either way, Avara knew that what had begun in her laboratory wouldn't end with the destruction of a single experiment. The knowledge couldn't be contained, couldn't be jettisoned into space and destroyed. It would emerge again, one way or another. As she transmitted the data, A thought occurred to her, a line from human literature that Gran had once shared with her. Pandora's box had been opened, and all the evils of the world had flown out. But at the bottom of the box, there remained one thing: hope. In this case, hope took the form of a remarkable enzyme and the genetic key to a future without biological limits. The Earth Embassy received Avara's transmission 3 days later. Ambassador Rana Vu, alone in her secure office, reviewed the data with an expression that moved from concentration to satisfaction. When she had finished, she established a heavily encrypted communication channel to Earth Central Command. The connection took several minutes to establish across interstellar distances, but eventually, the stern face of the Global Defense Director appeared on her screen. "Ambassador," the director acknowledged. "I assume you have news regarding Project Prometheus." "Yes, Director," Rana replied. "The experiment exceeded all expectations. Dr. Lin's analysis is remarkably thorough, despite the Council's attempt to destroy all evidence." "And their reaction?" "Terror, mostly awe. The realization that they've severely underestimated us." The director nodded, satisfied. "Just as we predicted. They've spent centuries studying what they call Deathworlds, cataloging the most dangerous environments and life forms. But they've never truly understood what that means for the species that evolve in such conditions. Evolution under constant threat," Rana agreed. "Biological systems pushed to their limits and beyond. The genetic redundancies, the adaptive mechanisms, the potential for advancement that most species never develop because they evolve in gentler environments. And now they know." The director's expression was solemn. "This changes the diplomatic landscape. The Council will no longer see us as junior partners seeking admission to their galactic community. They'll recognize us as equals, perhaps even as potential threats to be carefully managed." "Which gives us leverage we didn't have before," Rana pointed out. "Indeed. Prepare for new diplomatic instructions within the week. In the meantime, express our gratitude to Dr. Lin. Her curiosity has served both our species well." After the communication ended, Ambassador Rana Vu stood at the viewport of the Earth Embassy, gazing out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Deathworld Council was still coming to terms with what they had discovered about humanity. They had studied human biology, witnessed its potential, and screamed in the face of its implications. It was not the last time they would scream, but perhaps, in time, they would learn to see humanity's potential as something more than frightening. Perhaps they would come to understand that a species forged in the crucible of a death world carried not just the scars of that evolution, but also its gifts. The potential for transcendence, the capacity for transformation, the promise of a future without end. And if that realization came with a scream, well, some truths were worth screaming about.